Pardon the interruption, I'm Chris Gehrz. Sam, today is July 29th. It's National Lasagna Day. How are you going to celebrate?
We're having ribs. Welcome to PTI, boys and girls. I'm Sam Mulberry. Chris, the second exam is now behind us.
Wait, if students caught the joke that we just did in the opening, should they write in for that as well? That was a very...
Well, what is the reference of we're having ribs?
Of that?
Okay, that would be good.
Sorry, that was a joke, right? It was very hard to tell.
We are, in fact, having ribs.
Okay.
I demand it.
Okay.
Anyhow, the second exam is behind us now. You graded those over the weekend. Any observations you had from the second exam?
One is... I'm always struck by how students respond to Erasmus, because I think we throw a lot of effort into him, and actually we've probably amped it up a little bit in the online version of the class. And I think that was a real big differentiator, I think, because if you get Erasmus, you'd get Advantes both in the Renaissance sense of someone who's really drawn to the Greeks and Romans, but also in the Reformation sense, who thinks that the church needs to go back to the simplicity, the poverty in some ways of the early church. And I think if you got that, you did really well with the essay. And people who struggle more with the essay, I think, had very little to say about Erasmus, since that was a good indicator.
Right, and I think that's actually a good point to make, which is sometimes putting some of these figures together helps to complicate the other figures. So what I found myself writing on a lot of the essays was, okay, you talked about Luther and Advantes, which works, and you talked about Erasmus and Advantes. To do that and not say what would Luther think of Erasmus as Advantes is definitely missing something. Part of what we're trying to do, both we as teachers, but also we as historians, right, people taking this course, is to complicate the matter and say, how do these people at the same time period deal with the same ethos?
And I think the other thing that really marked the really good essays is they used those kind of examples, Erasmus, Luther, to support larger observations. I think a problem we used to have back when we did this kind of essay on the in-class was we give these really detailed bullet points. Make sure you do this, and students would just answer the bullet points and kind of forget the larger question. And I saw a little bit of that, where some students, you just had paragraphs that were simply to check off a bullet point, and they kind of lost track of what the bigger question of how the Renaissance and the Reformation are breaking with medieval values and practices and institutions. Beyond that, I think time management we keep talking about, and I kind of saw some of each. I had a couple students finish, they had at least 5 minutes left. They probably could have used more time they probably could have actually done faster. Then a couple others got cut off in the middle of their essays. And my sense is still that if you're getting cut off, it's probably because you're having to use too much time with some of the objective questions. Certainly by the next exam, which is coming up really fast, at this point, you should have mastery, because a lot of these are terms that you're just reviewing from the first 2 units. If you don't know them by now, that really is going to make it hard to finish the essay on time. You should be able to rattle through map questions, vocab matching questions. So Sam, speaking of that, then the third exam is coming up Monday. It's a really short unit. The first one is like this, and then all of a sudden this last one is barely more than a week long. Any advice for dealing with that?
It's short in terms of the amount of time we're spending on it, but the content kind of comes like an avalanche. And there's a lot more thematic things. If you look at the Enlightenment Museum, right, that there is sort of this, you can go off in all these different wings. And the final museum we have is also going to have these different wings looking at the modern age. And that sometimes can be trickier to get your head around, right? So I think thinking about themes, thinking about big ideas, that'll also help point you to the essay. So I think knowing that, although there's only a week between when we're recording this on Monday and when you're going to be taking that test, this is going to be really important to organize ideas around themes. Think about the physical structure of the museums as kind of a table of contents, as something which tries to give you an organizing principle for thinking about these things.
Yeah, I think especially as you visit the Museum of the Modern Age, in some ways it's the most like the first museum of any of the museums we get. Some of these museums are really pretty tightly structured, coherent. This is one to explore. We give you a few readings, a few vocab terms, but this is the part of the course where we're looking out at what's to come. I think when we were first envisioning this, it was almost like you would be staring through this glass at the next course you would take, at what you might study in an L course or a U course. And so, we try to guide you a little bit, but it's a pretty open-ended worksheet. So just to reduce anxiety, if not expectations a little bit, that's one for you to explore. You'll actually learn about different courses you might take. The final thing just to mention here is once you're done with the third exam, you're not quite done with the course. You've got one last 50-point assignment, so 10% of your grade. We call it an exit interview. So you might talk more about this, you and Amy, on the last webisode, but it's 5 really big questions that sum up the whole course and get at the course outcomes that we have in the curriculum. And you've got a couple of days to work on it. So it's due 2 days after the exam. We'll give it to you right away. So if you want to take a kind of day to relax after the exam, that's fine. Or if you want to just dive right into it, you can do that too.
Chris, we've started to look at sort of the post-Reformation period now with the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment. I know that you are a historian of modern Europe.
I am.
Right? That's one of the courses that you teach.
I do.
I also happen to know that the Enlightenment is one of your least favorite time periods.
It takes a surprisingly short time in modern Europe to deal with the Enlightenment the way I teach it.
That's right.
It's incredible.
With that in mind, though, what do you like best about the Enlightenment?
Yeah, I think a lot of the concerns I had got raised in the film's museums. I am concerned about hyper-individualism. Will come up in the last film. What I really like about the Enlightenment is that in 1750 or 1770, the vast majority of the world's population is not free in any sense. It's often been said that slavery was not the peculiar institution in the 18th century. Freedom was peculiar because slavery is this huge thing. It's not just the transatlantic slave trade. There are lots of forms of slavery around the world, but there's basically no democracies. England is maybe closest, but it's maybe 2% of the population votes. And it's largely because of Enlightenment that we get the notion of something like human rights. So I teach a class in human rights and international history, and maybe you can say there are deep roots, like in Christianity, the idea of the Imago Dei, or in other world religions, a sense of human dignity. But no one uses the language of human rights until 1750 in places like France and Scotland and Virginia and Pennsylvania. And all of a sudden, you've got someone like Jefferson saying this is self-evident. I don't even have to give evidence of this, that God creates us this way and we've got dignity and worth and equality. And that is just a revolutionary idea that we take for granted, I think, especially in this society. And for a lot of the world's population, the effects of that still haven't quite reached them. But I think it has had a profound impact on history, largely for the better, and it's still a source of hope for many people. And there are problems with it too, and that's why it takes a semester to teach that class. But if I had to make the case, that's why I would point to human rights and to some extent democracy that goes with that. Sam, to go back a century to the 17th century, I know from earlier conversations, if we were to ask you for your cloud of witnesses from CWC, and that'll be part of the exit interview, Pascal would probably be in there. Why is
Absolutely.
he such an inspiring, important figure in your mind?
A big part of it is that Pascal sort of straddles an interesting line to me. He's somebody who is a devout Christian, right? I mean, when we read the piece we have from Pascal, he's talking about faith and reason, right? So he's talking about faith, and he's talking about faith in a way that's really attractive to me, right? We sometimes at Bethel think about him as, he's not a pietist in the Philip Spener sense of pietist, but some of the notions that he has talking about, one of the organs in our body through which we know God is the heart, right? That it's not just the mind, but it's the heart, right? So I'm really drawn to that. That shapes a lot of the way that I think about kind of what I want to take to even what I want to take to Scripture, right? That when I read Scripture, that's the stuff that I'm interested in, right? That feeling, that experience, and then how that shapes how I live. So I'm interested in that part of Pascal. At the same time, Pascal is somebody who is tuned in to what is happening in the scientific revolution, right? He's a scientific revolution figure in lots and lots of ways as well. And that's fascinating to me. He's somebody who is seeing what's happening, right? So he's alive sort of in that time period between Newton and Galileo. And he's kind of reading the tea leaves because he's a scientist and saying, this is heading in some interesting but also potentially troubling directions. One of my favorite quotes from him is he's sort of thinking about, kind of what's happening in the sciences and what's happening in astronomy especially, right? And this idea that we've moved from this kind of closed cosmos where the Earth is at the center and God is in control, and we're moving towards this sort of expansive infinite universe, right? And Pascal says that the silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. He's not saying it's not true, but he's saying he's aware of that shift, that something's happening, and that there are sort of questions about that, things we need to think about that. I just recently started having conversations about this stuff with my kids, about sort of space and the infinite nature of space and thinking about time and stuff like that. And it's fun to sort of watch my kids, their minds kind of explode a little bit. Now, they can't quite wrap their heads around it all, but they're really interested in the fundamental question my daughter asked was, in space there's not air. What is there? And I said, it's just a vacuum. There's nothing. And like she's fascinated by it, right? And I think Pascal is somebody who is trying to walk both of those lines. And those are the people that are most interesting to me, as we talked about earlier, because they problematize things. They make things more complex. It isn't a matter of faith or science, or to say, well, those two things work together. It's like he says, yes, they work together, but that relationship is something you need to constantly negotiate, and I'm fascinated by him because of that.
Yeah, that's what I really like about him too. I really hate false binaries. It's absolutely this or it's absolutely this, and there's no room in between. And so I appreciate people who take middle paths through things and say it's this but this, yes but this, both and. But also realize that doesn't mean it's easy, and that's my favorite thing about him is he's really honest in many ways, and I think we're drawn, maybe especially as Christians, in this kind of scary, infinite space that has new kinds of answers to, well, what is the reassuring thing going to be? What is maybe the idol, to use Bacon's language, that's going to make us feel better about it all? And he's not going to give us that. He's also at the same time inspiring, because he does say at some point, this is a heart thing. It's something you feel, and it's not something you can do by your own effort. One of my favorite passages in there is he recognizes both the potential of being human, but also the fact that he doesn't name it as sin, but he says there's this kind of defect, there's this dirtiness in here that means we are not capable entirely of our own. And so that's why you need the Redeemer figure. That's why we're drawn back to Christ.
Absolutely. Well, sort of based on that, Chris, we have our final discussion post, right, coming out of this webisode, and it has to do with kind of your connection to the sciences, right? You've as Bethel students, you may have already taken a science course here at Bethel, or multiple science courses. I know this is a theme that's come up in some of your writing already. In terms
or
of
in high school classes
before.
Right.
Yeah. That you've, in one way, shape, or form, you have experienced the sciences, right? And as people of faith, what we want to think about a little bit is kind of what is that. What have those encounters looked like? What's been sort of difficult, problematic things, interesting things that you've encountered with that?
Yeah, especially where have you most felt a tension between faith and science? Not to say it's unbridgeable. Maybe like Pascal, you think these are both valid and they're both important. Maybe you've resolved this. Maybe it's just an open question for you and you really don't know, and that's fine too. But as you've taken biology or chemistry or physics or geology or math or computer science, or if you want to talk about social sciences like psychology or sociology, feel free to do that too. But where have you felt that tension especially? And to the extent you have, how have you started to resolve it? So that'll be your last discussion post then. We'll have one more webisode before the test. When we come back, we'll talk more about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Okay, we're back with a game we haven't played since I think the first webisode, actually.
I haven't had a chance to play this summer.
So we're a little bit out of practice. We're a little rusty, but we're going to try playing Heads on Sticks and to meet some of our favorite figures from the Age of Reason, the scientific revolution.
All right, so Chris, I am up first. Who am I?
Sam, you are Sir Isaac Newton. No, Sir Isaac.
Thank you for adding that.
Sure.
I am a knight of the realm.
We heard in the last film that you were ranked the second most important person in history, with Jesus number 3. Are you bigger than Jesus? To quote another British knight.
Yes. Well, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I mean, I think my ideas are really important. I mean, I along with the giants whose shoulders I was standing on, I helped to really fundamentally change the way people view the world around us, view the physical world around us. So I think I'm pretty important. I think my contributions are pretty important. One of the things that you need to realize is I've sort of wrapped up my science about halfway through my life, and I spent the rest of my life writing theology, right? So I'm a devout believer, right?
Of some sort, right?
What do you mean by that?
No, I just, you hear rumors that maybe you believe in some kind of heterodox notions, but we don't have to get into that if you don't want.
It is still faith, my friend, though, right?
Faith.
Right. So I have...
You're not right. Yes, you're a man of faith and a man of science.
That's right.
Fair. Now, what about the? I mean, do we still live in a Newtonian world? I mean, has Mr. Einstein actually made you a little bit less important? I heard Sam telling me that he was trying to explain relativity to his children the other day. Do you know what relativity? Can you explain that to us?
This is not the venue or forum for that explanation, but I mean, I will say that people like Einstein and the rest of the sort of physicists, scientists from the 20th century, they haven't made me obsolete because my rules still work we live in a Newtonian world. It's just when you push the edges and get very big or very small or very fast or very hot, some of those principles break down. But those, you can still trust the laws that I do, or that I brought about in order to sort of live in this world by and large.
In many ways, they're standing on your shoulders. Is that not true?
This is true.
Very good. Sam, who am I?
Chris, you are Francis Bacon.
Francis Bacon.
Yes, and Francis, I believe I've taught this course for a long time. I believe your course, or your reading, is perhaps the most confusing reading that we have in CWC.
Thank you, sir.
Is it? Do you want to defend your reading at all?
No, it's about as obtuse as I could possibly make it. I thought I'd keep it short but unreadable was my basic goal when I was writing Novum Organum. I will say to students, as you read my brilliant words, perhaps don't get so hung up on the different types of idols. There probably is some significant overlap between some of the idols or saying some of the same kinds of things. I think it's more the concept of the idol is what you want to think about.
So what is the idol?
So the idol is that there are ways that we look at the universe that we've inherited, that we've assumed, that we haven't questioned very much, but they make sense of the universe, and we cling to them, we give homage to them, we worship them in some important way, and they become a master in our lives, but they're deceitful. They're not actually true. We are being lazy when we use these idols instead, and they distract us. They lead us. They're a false god, I guess, if you will, and they lead us away from truth. And so what I'm trying to get us to think about is, in what ways do we have kind of easy, ready-made answers that need to be questioned quite a bit harder? And how does science help us to do that? Especially in my case, how does empirical research, how does observation and experimentation help us to question idols? Now, whether that's true of Christianity, I'm not going to get into on this show. I've gotten into plenty of trouble in my own life about my views on organized religion and on belief in God. But it's far be it from me to say you can't think about the ways that religion can serve as an idol as well.
Great. Chris, who am I?
Sam, you are Benjamin Franklin, Sir Benjamin. No, probably not Sir Benjamin Franklin. You're a
How dare you?
Figure. Ben Franklin, you say that there are only 5 basic religious principles in your autobiography. So I bet you're a basketball fan. In that bracket, what was the last one out and the last one in?
Well, this is an interesting question, right? Because as I'm looking at sort of these sort of basic religious principles, I'm looking at, what do we see in most world religions? What are the things that are at the core, especially of splits between different groups within Christianity, right? What is at the core of that religion? And I think we find some basic things that are, these would be the one seeds if you're thinking about the idea that God created the world, right? That's the
overall number one, right?
That's right. Okay. That's right. That's number one with a bullet, you might say, or a musket ball. Wow. So God created the world. God rules the world by His providence. That the best thing you can do is to do good to others, right? I mean, that seems like a good principle, because really what I think the purpose of religion is to make us good people, good citizens, good human beings, right? So I think the fact that religion teaches us to do that seems like a good religious principle. That virtue will be rewarded and crimes will be punished. That seems pretty good, right? So I mean, these are some of the principles that seem pretty unassailable.
I think you said the virtue will be rewarded or crime punished either here or in the hereafter.
Well, I purposely didn't say that yet, because the principle that was the diciest that I included was this notion that the soul is immortal, right? Because then things can be punished either here or hereafter, right? So the immortality of the soul is probably the one that's on the shakiest ground as we think about sort of this intersection of science and religion, in my time.
I believe that Monsieur Descartes asked the same kinds of questions in his reading in the reading packet. Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
So what didn't quite make the cut but was really close? What did you agonize over as you and the committee deliberated?
Well, again, I'm trying to think of things, sort of principles in society and life that are sort of most ubiquitous and most important. And I think I landed on $5 footlongs. Like I almost included that as an essential thing. I'm thinking that maybe Mr. Jefferson can put that in as one of those inalienable rights.
Most
that were
religions
granted.
do teach that.
That's right.
I think the Presbyterians skip it, but otherwise, yeah.
That's right. Absolutely.
Right.
And this is why I am one of the greatest American presidents.
I never doubted it. Okay. Sam, who am I?
You are Robespierre, representing the entirety of the French Revolution.
That's a lot to carry on my shoulders.
Right. Chris has long insisted, so you're going to need to respond to this, that we don't do the French Revolution justice. right, in this course. Can you give 1 minute, if I give you 1 minute, to explain why this is more significant than the American Revolution?
Mais bien sûr. I think it's indisputable. I'll stop that right now.
I was going to say in English por favor, but that's not French.
No, I think if I had to make the case, in some ways, the French Revolution flows out of the American, but it comes from its own causes, and it's more far-reaching. The American Revolution doesn't actually go that far. Largely, the people who were in power before the Revolution are still in power. It doesn't translate that far into society. The French Revolution has its own limits, but it's articulating a much more drastic change. There's a reason that Edmund Burke is much more bothered by the French Revolution than the American. As I think Chris said earlier, who wouldn't want to change that society? It was radically unfree and unequal and unjust. I might have been willing to behead people, but it's because I believed in a just society, a more virtuous society. I guess the other point I would make is that it's had more impact. First in Europe itself, we went in, we conquered Belgium. It doesn't sound like much, but we did it, Sam. We conquered Belgium, the Rhineland, Switzerland, northern Italy, and then it inspired other people like the Poles and the Irish and others, and they wrote constitutions based on ours. And then later in French history, we had our own colonies, which I'm not such a big fan of, had I been alive at the time, but it meant that all around the world, in Africa and Southeast Asia, there are people who borrowed our ideas. And then there are people in South America, like Bolivar and San Martin, who were inspired by us when they revolted against Spain. Much more directly than I'd say the American Revolution. It became a global idea and is significant for that reason.
I'm going to have to call time on here,
a minute and a half,
Mr. Robespierre. But well done. Chris, last one. Who am I?
A face familiar to everyone in online CWC. You are Dan Ritchie. Now, Dan, we saw a lot of you in the last museum. 2 more questions, if we might. First of all, what was Sam like as a CWC student? And second of all, does anyone at Bethel have better hair than you do?
Well, as to the first question, I was Sam's small group leader in the fall of 1995, back when I still taught CWC. I think mostly he was just really quiet. He didn't say much. The biggest thing I noticed is he always sat in the exact same place. He never moved. He was always in the same chair. If we got into groups, he would just slide that chair. That was the chair he sat in.
Now,
the creature of habit.
How many points did you take off of Sam's exams, all told, in his semester in CWC? Was it more or less than 5 points total?
I was definitely less than 10 total for the whole semester. He didn't miss an objective point on a quiz or an exam for the whole semester.
Sitting in the same seat really worked for Sam.
Yes. I think that.
As to your hair, I'm sorry, I buried the lead in that set of questions. It's quite beautiful. I can't.
Why? Thank you.
You're very well coiffed, as one of our colleagues once said. Do you want to share any secrets for us?
No, but I also want to point out I'm very well dressed as well. You can't really tell it here. It's the head on a stick.
It's not bodies on stick.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Are there any competitors on the faculty? If you have a rivalry with anyone on your floor, maybe?
I would say the number one contender is down the hall, and that's Mr. Vernon Lee.
It's a very different kind of good hair.
Yes. Very good hair, very good dresser. In fact, I would like to challenge Vernon Lee to a Zoolander-esque model off.
You heard it here first, Vernon Lee. Don't duck this challenge. We want to see this. Who has the better hair? Settle it once and for all. And that's how we play Heads on Sticks. And that's why we haven't done it for a few weeks now.
And probably.
It's happy time, everyone. Happy birthday to the Arc de Triomphe. There's some more French for you, Sam. Inaugurated in Paris on this day in 1836. Sam, where does the Arc rank among the most impressive monuments that you've seen in Europe?
It's really big. So I think that makes it impressive. And what it really has that other monuments don't have is location. It has the best location, I think, of any monument in Europe. Well, would anything else hold a candle to that? In terms
I can't
of
imagine. No. I mean, the combination of like grandeur and location. It's on the Champs-Elysees, so it's a really ritzy shopping and entertainment district. And it kind of radiates outwards.
Yeah, and there's a big. It's like a big wheel, and all the spokes come together at the Arc de Triomphe.
At the other end of the avenue, there's so much more. It's called L'Arche. It's the new arch, and it's very modernist. And it's bigger, I think, actually, but it's an unfair competition. I think that gives it a leg up as well.
That's right. Happy anniversary. The National Aeronautics and Space Act signed into law by Dwight D. Eisenhower on this day in 1958. Chris, it created NASA. All right? How much money would you pay to go to space, Chris?
This is interesting because I don't know. Like, it seems on level ridiculous. Like, I'm not a Richard Branson. I'm not going to be one of those. But like, if it were actually possible, I don't think I would bankrupt myself, but I would love to do it. It would be a wonderful experience. And I've loved space travel forever.
What's the draw?
The draw is like I've heard astronauts talk. I mean, like so there would be a problem here. The draw is like I've heard astronauts talk about, and it's like this transcendent religious experience. And the problem is you can never recreate it again. And I think some of them go a little bit crazy trying to find something to recreate it again. I don't know. I've just been interested forever. Like one of my favorite experiences in high school debate was we had a resolution about space travel one year, and so we got to prepare cases to argue. Now, ironically, ours was that we should not send people into space, we should just do unstaffed exploration. But it was really exciting to kind of think through where might we be. And that was like 1991 or 92. And I remember at the time thinking, well, of course, in 20 years we'll be back to the moon. Then, there was a Mars case we could do. And so the flip side is that I feel kind of sad about where we are with human space exploration.
Mm-hmm.
We just had the 45th anniversary of the moon landing, and we keep talking about the next
Right.
project, but it just seems...
Well, I mean, yeah. To make us sound very old, in 1986 is when the Challenger blew up. I was in third grade, and I remember thinking that mission was sending a teacher into space. Is that the next thing is they were going to send a class of students into space? And of course, as a third grader, I thought, well, that's going to be my class.
You're lined up for it.
So I remember that happening and thinking, I'm probably not going to get to go to space.
Yeah. Okay, well, I feel good and bad. Happy trails to me being on this webisode. It'll just be Sam and Amy for the 7th and last webisode later this week. Sam, what's my best moment as a CWC webisode host?
Well, your best moment, don't make me choose. I think it's when you picked me as the winner of Food Chain in the last episode. So you won't be around to referee and judge the third.
How are you going to settle that? Are you going to bring in a third party, an impartial?
It might end in fisticuffs.
Okay.
It's hard to say.
Viewer's choice, would that work? Is there any way to...
Oh, that's not bad.
Extra credit question
if only if there was some way that we could sort of tap into, ways to communicate socially online.
I will say, because I think she's watching, my favorite moments on the second test was, I think Tori wrote about your debate about Michelangelo, actually made it into her essay, so that gave me a strangely
that's fantastic.
heartwarming.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Do we have any, we've got your Backman.
We do, Chris. We have 2 photos this week. The first comes from Carolina Copeland. She was dog sitting and studying for CWC. She says this is always a good combo. She said that the dog is really more interested than it looks in this photo, than she looks in this photo. In fact, her favorite chapter was on the Reformation.
Interesting.
Is that surprising?
I don't know how to break that down.
All right.
Why, the dog or Carolina? The dog, right?
I think the dog's
okay.
favorite. Yes.
We got into pronouns there, and I wasn't sure where we were going. Okay.
Fair enough. And our second Backman photo comes from Michelle Clinton. And this is the furthest away that we think any photo has come from
I think
yet.
it might be hard to top, because this is probably like roughly halfway around.
Chris, we were just talking about space travel, my friend.
Oh, sorry.
They have like a week and a half to take a photo from space.
Right,
maybe an Earthrise on the moon with Backman in the foreground.
Make it happen, people. Photoshop it if you have to. That'd be great.
I like that. So this comes from Michelle Clinton in the Philippines, right? So she said that her kids were swimming in the backyard and she was reading.
Nice. So thanks so much. I think we've been, I don't want to say pleasantly surprised, but very pleasantly pleasant. I mean, it's very
pleasant.
It's very pleasant.
Just say it's pleasant.
No, I mean, I think we appreciate people taking this challenge to heart. And you still have one more webisode in which to submit them. So get those pictures to probably Sam, or your small group leader. We'll get them to Sam eventually. You do have a discussion post, your last one, due tomorrow. So think about your experience of science classes you've taken here at Bethel or before coming to Bethel, and where you felt tension between science and faith, and if you've resolved that, or how you're starting to work through that. Any your last words before they get to the, well, I guess you have another webisode before the third exam. Any last words, Sam?
No.
And that's how we end this webisode.